The Echo Chamber, brought to you by the Holmes Report and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers. And sponsored by March Communications, connecting innovation and people.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. This is Arun Sudaman, and I'm joined today on Skype all the way from Texas. It's Jana Lynne Sanchez. Jana, welcome to the Echo Chamber.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
I'm quite excited, actually, to have you on today's show. The last time we met seemed like another lifetime. I was living in London. You were living in London. You were running a public relations agency, a very good public relations agency, as I recall, called CitySavvy. But now you have quite a different career going on. You are running for Congress in the 6th District of Texas. So tell us a little about that. Yes,
it's completely true that I'm running for Congress, something I never, ever thought I would do. I never even contemplated running for any kind of office before. In fact, if somebody had ever suggested it, I would have laughed. And then what happened was the election of Donald Trump to presidency last year. And as the granddaughter of a man who immigrated here to America from Mexico, I felt very much under attack from the rhetoric from the far right in our country, and the need to stand up and be counted and have a seat at the table. So it took a little while to get me to this point. What happened is, the night of the election, I was absolutely in shock, like everyone else I know in America who did not expect Trump to win. And I was up all night texting my friends in Europe. They were all going, "Get out of there, come back to Europe, it'll be safe here." And I thought about it. I thought about coming back. I had just moved home, I think about 2 years prior to that, to help take care of my aging parents. And I thought about going back to Europe, but I decided that this is my country and that I had a right and an obligation to stay and fight for people who aren't able to fight, but also for our democracy, because I felt what was happening was extremely undemocratic, particularly the attacks on minorities and the attacks on the free press. As a former journalist, I was very concerned about that. So I'm probably going on too long, but a friend talked me into running, and I agreed, essentially.
Yeah, no. Please don't let me stop you. What was the? I mean, so you decided you wanted to stay and fight, and you know, I think those are really laudable sentiments. But to get from there to actually running, what was the sort of clinching argument?
Well, what happened is actually the next morning on November 9th, I texted a friend of mine. She and I used to raise money for Democratic candidates back, ages and ages ago. It was in the early 90s in California, the late 80s, early 90s. And I texted her and I said, I really feel so guilty. All I did was give money to Hillary. I voted for Hillary, but I didn't do anything else, and I didn't have any impact, and look what happened. And I said, I want to make sure I have an impact. And I really thought she would say, you should raise money for Planned Parenthood, or you should go to work as a communications director for one of the organizations that deal with immigration issues, or one of the Democratic Party, for instance. I honestly thought that's what she would say, and that was the kind of advice I was looking for. But instead she said, you have to run for office. And I said, no, that's crazy. I said, I cannot run for office. And she said, yes, you can. She said, you can because you will win. And I started thinking about it. She said, and I said, I live in a district or in a county that's 80% Republican, and I'm a Democrat. So she said, well, look around and see if there are any districts where the incumbent looks vulnerable or the district is more favorable. So I did a little research, and I saw that the Congressional district, which is very large, and normally you would not jump into a Congressional district as your first political campaign, but it was the only district that I lived in that I thought was winnable because it's an R+9 district, which means that an average Republican would beat an average Democrat by 9 points.
Wow.
But I was expecting a blue wave, and I felt that I might be an exceptional candidate against a very weak incumbent who'd been there for 33 years and was very, very old, and who's now out due to a sex scandal, which made the headlines even in London.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And yes, that was my opponent.
Yes, I know, and we'll talk about that a little bit, because
Yeah.
I think you actually wrote a rather catchy song.
Yes,
about
I've
him as
written
well.
a couple of catchy songs about him, which I'm not going to be able to play now, which is such a shame. So anyway, I decided to get into that race because the lady who ran last time and the two guys who ran before that had raised almost no money, and you must raise lots of money to run a successful campaign in America. I'm going to probably need to spend, I thought 1.5 million, but now I think maybe 2 million before it's all over, which I will have to raise. So if you cannot raise money, you cannot run a successful campaign. She'd only raised, at the time I thought 14,000. It turns out to be 22,000, running against an incumbent who had raised 1.4 million. So I thought, well, I can raise more. I can raise more than 22,000 or 14,000. And also I know how to message. That this is where my public relations background is very, very important. And I understand media, and that's also been very important for my campaign, because I'm sure you want to know about how the overlap between public relations and politics. So I decided that, and that I was willing to put in the work, because I'm a very, very hard worker. I don't sleep much, and I work a lot, so I figured that would make a big difference. So I decided to run, and I jumped in, and I've been, I think from the beginning, the front runner among the Democrats, despite running against somebody who's ran before, and then running against a lot of basically young men. So I think being a woman today is very important. Being able to raise money is very important. And then I think probably the most important thing is having a message that appeals to the majority of voters in the district. I know that my opponents have also copied my messaging to a certain degree, but I don't think they're as effective at it because it's more authentic for me. It's been my messaging from the beginning. And so I think I've been able to be more effective with my messaging than they have been. And that is a result of my background in public relations.
Sure. So let's talk a little about your background first, because you were, if I'm not mistaken, a journalist with Reuters in Europe, right, in Amsterdam.
Yes, correct, in Amsterdam.
Right, and then you set up, you co-founded the PR agency? Yes,
correct. The first thing I did when I got out of school was political fundraising. The next thing I did is I went to journalism. I started at the Baltimore Sun. I was just a lowly editorial assistant, but they let me write a lot. I got a lot of articles published, mainly in the food and travel sections is mainly where I wrote. But I wrote sort of feature-y things, and that was great. That was great experience. And then when I moved to London, I worked, which I did in '96, at the end of '96. I worked in trade media. I did technology trade media for a couple of years. And then I landed the job at Reuters as a correspondent in Amsterdam covering TMT. So it all sort of flowed very nicely. And then when I finished, I set up CitySavvy. I ran that. I was the CEO for, I think, 7 or 8 years. And then we changed structure, and I was one of the partners. I'm now still an owner, but I'm not involved in any way in the company.
Okay. And you moved back to the U.S. in?
Well, initially I came to the U.S. at the end, or the last half of 2014, to help a colleague set up our London office. But then our colleague didn't get her work permit. She was English, and she didn't get her work permit. And so everything sort of became up in the air then, and I came back and forth between Texas and New York the next year, only half-heartedly trying to set up a company there because I didn't have it in me. I'd already done it twice, and I was ready for a change in my life. I was mainly doing a lot of songwriting and performing here in Texas, and I rescued a dog, and I was sort of just enjoying my life in Texas. So I continued to work for a couple of clients, but I didn't really ever build the agency because I felt like I'd already built 2 offices, and I was at a point in my life where this probably wasn't really what I wanted to do. So I went back and forth between New York and Texas for about, I guess it was almost 2 years. It was or a year and a half. And then I just said, forget it, I'm going to be here. And then I moved. I got rid of my New York apartment, which saved me a bundle of money.
Yeah, I bet.
Because it was so expensive. And then I've been in Texas full time, really for, again, about more than a year now. I've been full time here. Before that, I was commuting and I was based here.
Okay. And so you go from journalism to running a PR agency and now running for Congress. Which would you say has been the most fun of those 3 occupations?
Oh, that's a good question. I think being a journalist was more fun. PR was pretty fun too. There were a lot of glamorous things. We got to go to all these nice award ceremonies like the ones your company hosts. We got to travel a lot for clients. I spent a lot of time on planes all over Europe, and as an American, that was exciting and glamorous. We made a lot of money. That was fun. There's absolutely nothing fun about running for office except parades. I love being in parades. I've done 4 of them, and I absolutely adore it. If I could do that every day, I would recommend everyone run for office. Parades, and I like block walking. I like going out, knocking on the door, and actually talking to voters, which I do. I now personally do it at least twice a week, maybe more. I was doing it 5 days a week, but I've had to focus more on fundraising now. So running for Congress is not fun. I never planned to do it. Don't really enjoy it much. It's just I have a burning passion to save our country and save our democracy. And that's the only thing that gets me up every morning because it's really hard. You have people attacking you in a way that you don't have in public relations or journalism. Yeah. So, or at least at the level I was at, we didn't have that. So, no, it's really different, and it's not really. I don't recommend it if you have any. If you're thin-skinned at all, which I am, it's very hard to be in politics, and the work is very hard. I sleep probably about 4 hours a night now, and I know why Margaret Thatcher only slept 4 hours a night. So it's very hard.
So tell us a little bit about the public relations lessons, the communications lessons that you've learned through your career and that you're applying to your campaign now.
So I think one of the reasons that I'm doing very well in this campaign is that I have a very strong sense of messaging about the importance of people understanding what you stand for. And I developed that through my work in public relations. I was very shocked when I first got into public relations to learn that most companies don't actually have a strong set of messages about themselves. They have a tough time defining who they are and what they stand for, and even what their strategy is. So I spent almost a decade helping companies sort that out. I mean, a lot of what I did at CitySavvy was, message workshops to help companies figure out how to better talk about what they're doing, and also to help get everybody on the same page. Which is harder than it sounds. You think we're all such professionals. We know what we're doing. We should be very good at this. And that was, so I spent so much time doing that, and I'm using that a lot. I sat down. I did that from the beginning. I very conscientiously thought about what are people hungry for? What do people want? People only really care about the economics of their family. And that's what I focused on from the beginning. There are a lot of other issues I care about, but I've been able to focus because of my focus on messaging. I could figure out what was important to people and focus on those things. And I've done that. I've been very, very consistent in all of my messaging. I'm not saying it hasn't moved on a little bit. Around the edges it has moved on, but the core issues have remained better jobs for high school graduates, health care for all, because that's a whole other story about what's happening here in health care, and well-funded public schools not depleted by vouchers. And these have been my messages from the beginning. I also have some other messaging about, immigration. It's of personal interest to me, and I know that I will be attacked viciously by the Republicans who are very anti-immigrant. But I'm willing to stand up for that because I believe it very, very strongly. But all of my messaging has been consistent, and my messaging has coordinated purposely with my visual image, which is very Texan, very focused on being Texan, and a little bit down home. That's been a part of my image from the beginning. I always wear cowboy boots and denim skirts when everyone else is wearing a suit, and that has been treated with people have been critical of that, but I know it's right, and I know that because it matches with everything else I'm doing, and it's consistent. And I think this comes from my public relations background. It's also all very authentic. So if I hadn't been dressing like that already, it may have been different. And I do put on a suit if I feel like something requires a suit. Then I will put on a suit. But for the most part, I don't dress up in a suit. I dress up how I would normally dress in my authentic way, my authentic Texas way.
Okay. So you don't feel perhaps the need to maybe double down on your Texan bona fides because perhaps you were in Europe living a kind of glamorous lifestyle.
Sure. Well, yes, and again, some of my advisors, my supporters, and my consultants were concerned that I was a little too removed from the lives of people in this district. It's a working class district. The average household income is $55,000, and only 30% of people get a 4-year degree. So it's very much a working class district. But I am, I'm from an extremely poor family. And everything that I've accomplished in life and everything that I've done in life has been as a result of having the support of systems that were set up by Democrats, things like public schools, things like funding for being able to go to university. So these are all Democratic programs which helped me in my life. So I try to bring everything back to my childhood and my background as a true product of the American dream, someone whose grandfather, and my father, in fact, grew up on the road as a migrant farm worker. And, my father was an agricultural worker who got his lucky break and got a job in a cement factory and then a steel factory when I was in 6th grade, which is about when you're 10 or 11. And that sort of brought us into the lower middle class instead of the incredibly poor class. So my understanding of people in the district comes from my background growing up here and being like everybody else here. So I think it's about really the experiences that I've had in Europe. I talk about them all the time. I do not hide from them. My healthcare plan is based almost entirely on the Dutch system, and I'm able to talk with authenticity. So a lot of the progressive left side of the Democratic Party here talks about single-payer healthcare, which is like the NHS.
Yeah,
and my plan is a Bismarckian plan, which is based very closely on my experience in the Netherlands, and it's basically a translation of the U.S. system or the Dutch system for the U.S. market. And I do talk about the fact that I lived in both systems. They're both way better than we have here. That I would support single payer if that was what people wanted to do. However, I think the Bismarckian system is better. And I talk about that. I'm maybe sometimes sort of a geek on details. because I do like to study these things, and I have studied and I have determined, alongside my own personal experiences, that Bismarckian systems are better. Most of Europe is Bismarckian, so Switzerland, Germany, the Netherlands. I think pretty much most of Europe is Bismarckian. I think only the UK is a single payer. And so I'm able to talk about that in my experience. And I also talk about, I do talk about my experience living abroad. I don't know if on balance it's a plus, but it's a plus in terms of how it shapes my policy and my experience. And I am a business person, and my business is in Europe. So being a business person is a good credential when running for office. So I can't really hide from it.
Yeah, of course. And you it sounds like you almost treat yourself like a brand, which is presumably...
It is. It's a brand.
Right, which is presumably what you should do as a candidate. Now, I'm sure you are aware of brands and companies that are overproduced when it comes to their messaging, their public relations. So how do you guard against that as a candidate? Because I'm sure you also see it. We all see it, right, with political candidates, where it sometimes looks like they're a little bit too slick.
Well, I think that's about being. I think it's about being authentic. So I think that I'm an extremely authentic person. Anyone who knows me for 5 minutes knows exactly where I stand on everything and what I think. Yes. And I've always been like that. And to the point that it's really hurt me in my past because I can't hide my true feelings. I just don't have that ability. So people who support me know that they support me because I work hard, I'm smart, and because I'm who I say I am. And I think that comes through. And I think all you have to do is be true to who you are and why you're fighting and what you're doing, and that will come through to voters. There are a lot of people who spend their whole life wanting to be in elected office. And I think in that case, they probably spend a lot of time, perfecting their life so that they look the part. I don't look the part. I don't have a husband and 4 children, and I have only a dog. So I think there's almost no chance that I'm overproduced. I think quite the opposite. I think a lot of my supporters sometimes think, why doesn't she just, try a little bit harder to be less herself?
Right. Another question I wanted to ask you, and again, comes back to the kind of the dynamics which I suppose typically characterize political campaigns. Compared to the business world, politics is much more zero-sum, right? So you win, someone else loses, or you lose, someone else wins. How do you deal with the kind of negativity and the attacks? Because that's not something that you have to do as much of when you're managing a brand's reputation.
It would be almost impossible to deal with the negativity. I've been attacked pretty viciously because I'm the front runner by the other Democrats, and it's going to get worse when I get into the general against the Republicans. I still have another few months to go in the primary, and then I'm going to have 9 months against Republicans. I could not survive this if I didn't have a core group of people who stand beside me and say, wow, what a dick that person was, or, wow, that really backfired on them, and, you just keep doing what you're doing. And they sometimes say, well, I don't know, I think they kind of scored one against you there or whatever. They're honest and they're helpful, but it's a support team. I also, this year there's something phenomenal happening in this country, which is that 18,000 women have at least thought about running for an office. And I work very, very closely with a core group of about 25 women who are running for other offices. And we always say to each other, I don't know how we would survive if we didn't have each other. We chat on WhatsApp. And I sent a snarky message this morning about one of my opponents to the group. It's all confidential, and we don't share it outside the group. And I sent a snarky message about one of them. And, of course, it's laughing and everybody making fun of him and everything. So that sort of helps, like knowing that you're not in this alone. I might be in this district alone, but I've got this huge support system of my friends who are running my campaign essentially, and also of these women who are running their own campaigns, and we all help each other. One called me last night to ask me for advice on what to do, and and I could talk to her on my way home in the car, which was great. And so, it's that support system is very, very important. And also, you just have to believe that this isn't about you. That has been the hardest part of this for me, is that I went from being someone in the background advising CEOs, helping CEOs sound smart and on top of messaging, to actually being the person out front, something I am not comfortable doing and have never wanted to do. But you have to just realize you are the front person here for an idea, for a movement, for a belief, for a cause, and that you're representing not yourself, but all these other people who believe in what you're doing and want to help you. So you have to step back from it a bit and not take it too personally. It's hard. I mean, I can imagine what Joe Barton feels like right now, because that's all on him, and there's nobody else that can be blamed. No. And I'm sure it's a very lonely place to be.
Well, he made his bed, if you'll excuse the pun. But.
Well, I think, I don't know if you saw my press release about this. I feel that I don't feel like he did a whole lot wrong. I feel that he basically did something a little bit foolish, is that he did something public. He put something on the internet that should have remained private. Yeah. But other than that, I feel that he was in a way a victim, and in a way judged very harshly for something that many, many, many people do. I mean, there's a reason smartphones are so successful, and a lot of that has to do with sort of sexting and sending videos and all that stuff.
I must be missing out on all this, but but you kind of you did contribute to it a little bit, right? Because you followed Joe Barton around. You wrote, I think, at least one song, or was it two?
I've written 2 songs about Joe Barton, and I mean, it's really true. For me, what was obscene about Joe Barton was not that video, which I don't want to ever see again because it was really gross, but was more his voting record. His voting record was obscene. He didn't represent the people of this district, and it was really fun having someone like that to be your opponent. Now there are 11 Republicans running to take his place, and I can't write songs about all of them. So, I wrote 2 songs. One was called Don't Tell Us to Shut Up, which he told someone to shut up at a town hall meeting. And I wrote that song. And then the other one was called Quid Pro Joe, which is about his record of taking money from polluters and big oil and voting against his district, and also paying his children lots of money from campaign funds. So it was a really funny song. I loved it. It's online. You can find it at quidprojoe.com. It's still there.
We'll link to it on the in our show notes. So if you're listening to this, and you can find it online via the link Jana's given, or we'll link to it on the homesreport.com website as well. Coming back to the issue of negative attacks, do you have, for example, a rapid response operation? Do you have a war room? Is there kind of a structure to deal with it?
At this point, we're in the primary now, and I don't really need a rapid response because I'm so far out in front of the other candidates. I've been working so hard. I feel that they don't have the ability. Either they don't have anything negative really that they can say about me that I haven't made public myself, and they try. But mostly I just ignore them because mostly they are total amateurs. So I ignore them. Right. I do have a lawyer who I consult when they do something particularly outrageous. But so far it's all friendliness in public. And then, talking about me behind my back, nothing that I would react to. Right. I did get accused of being, there was a troll who was part of one of the other campaigns, a fake profile, who went around telling everyone, was messaging everyone, saying that I'm a fake Latina, which means that they said I am white, and that I got the name Sanchez from one of my 4 ex-husbands. Well, first of all, I haven't been married 4 times. I stopped at 2. And secondly, I was born with the name Sanchez, and I'm exactly what I've always said I am, which is a person of mixed race, or of mixed heritage. My grandfather was Mexican, and everybody else was Scots-Irish or English. And I'm very proud of that background. I think it's very truly American. But I'm just a little bit smarter than them. So what I did is I took a screenshot of my Ancestry DNA page that shows that my heritage comes from central Mexico. And I posted it on my website, and it got thousands of likes. I mean, people loved it. People loved because if they can prove that you are not who you say you are, then that really damages your brand, you as a person. So in that case, I responded to it. But I know how to respond to those things. I don't really have to ask anyone. My instinct is to stand up and argue. Also, one of my opponents was going around telling people that I was a homophobe. And so I addressed that. I just addressed it on my Facebook page. I have a following of about 20,000 people on social media.
Real people?
Real people. Yeah, that's interesting because one of my opponents bought about 12,000 bots on Twitter, so she could look like she was had following. But I actually have 13,000 followers. Right. Okay. So and they're very active. You can tell when people are followed by bots and when they actually have an active following. And so I have a good network for getting news and information out very quickly. I have, I have about at least probably about 5,000 followers between my 2 pages on Facebook. And then I have 13,000 followers on Twitter. And then I have a couple thousand followers on LinkedIn. And I also have things like Instagram. And then I have an email database of 15,000 people. So, sending rumors around in activist networks don't really have much effect if you have a larger stage from which to speak, and also if you're speaking the truth.
Yeah, and it sounds like, as befits someone with your communications background, you have probably a better than average grasp of digital media, I would imagine. Yes,
I'm way ahead of my Democratic opponents, and I'll be way ahead of whichever Republican comes out of an 11-way race, because there are 11 Republicans vying to run against me.
Now, how important will that digital footprint be, given that so much politics is retail, right? Still.
So it has a couple of functions. It does help me solidify my relationship with people locally. For instance, I just recruited a bunch of candidates to run in Ellis County, one of the 3 counties in my district. And a lot of that was done via Facebook Messenger, and because they were friends of mine on Facebook, I could message them and say, hey, you look like somebody who might want to run for office. and I got a lot of positive responses. Then because they knew me over the last year via Facebook, they were more open to coming on board and running for these lower offices, which is very important for voter turnout. It boosts, the more people you have on the ballot as a Democrat, the more voter turnout is boosted. And we haven't had a Democratic slate in this county for about 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Yeah, it was a pretty big coup. It's like probably one of the most exciting things I've done since running. And so I recruited a lot of those via Facebook and via my relationships via Facebook. The other thing I've done very successfully with social media is I've raised a lot of money via social media. So a lot of my contributions come in $1 contributions or $10 or $25. I've even had some of $1,500 that I got from people who only knew me from social media, particularly Facebook. You have a real chance to bond with people on Facebook. And so I was able to build a pretty good following on Facebook of women in particular, but some men who have sent large contributions to my campaign, and a lot of people who have sent small contributions to my campaign. So social media is really important. It's very important for managing volunteers. We have about 15 to 20 people every weekend who walk precincts with us and talk to voters. And we organize all that through Facebook. My deputy campaign manager uses that a lot. My finance manager uses it a little less. So the fundraising, the person who's responsible for fundraising uses it a little less. But much of my strength as a candidate does come from my strong social media presence, particularly Facebook. Twitter has gotten me some national attention. I've had some national endorsements, and those groups, I think, probably heard about me via Twitter because I have such a large following, and it's a very, very active following where people retweet a lot and like a lot and that sort of thing. And I have I think a kind of sarcastic or ironic sense of myself on Twitter, and I think that works well there. You have to be careful. I do get in trouble sometimes, and I have to be careful about that because I do go a bit overboard.
Yeah, but I think it's impossible to not. I think doing what you're doing, you are. Well,
when you look at, our choices today are between two men who have relationships with young girls. One prosecuted their murderer, and the other one was dating them. And that's our choices today in Alabama. And you can't help calling Roy Moore a pedophile. I mean, it's just going to come up. So. That's, you get into trouble for things like that, but I do it anyway.
Sure. Now, you mentioned the number, I think it came from Emily's list, the number of women that are seeking or interested in running for office has just been this remarkable explosion, right? 18,000, 19,000. Why do you think that's happened, and how important do you think that is for the direction of political races, whether it's nationally or locally? I
think it's phenomenally important. Now, I always say I didn't run because I'm a woman. I ran because I'm a patriot. And while that's true, there's something very, very special happening this year. When we walk precincts, we hear people say to us, women and men, I'm sick of the men who are in office. I think it's like overwhelmingly male on almost every level of this country, the leadership. I'm sick of men. I'm only voting for women this year. And I don't think many men are going to do very well against women, to be honest. I think women candidates are certainly going to prevail in the Democratic Party in almost every case. Where they might be sort of equal candidates, the woman is going to prevail. And I think a lot of men probably sat out this year because they could see that there was something phenomenal happen. And that was before all of the allegations of sexual harassment and abuse that was surfacing. I mean, a lot of the anger that you saw and the determination that you saw in women in the Women's March of almost a year ago now, women across this country and the world went out in, absolutely to protest and to find solidarity. We have elected a man to office who bragged openly about grabbing women by the pussy because he could. And that infuriated a lot of women. It's also a coalition of people who elected him who believe that women should not have control over their own bodies, should not have access to birth control, should not be given equal rights in many cases, and including women who voted for this. White Americans overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump of every income level, not just the working poor, as it's often portrayed, and including the majority of white women voted for Donald Trump. And that is just shocking to any progressive woman. It's absolutely shocking and appalling. So I think we're really fired up as a country, and I think a lot of women came to the same conclusion that my friend brought me to, which is that in order to have a seat at the table, we have to be at the table. We have to be in power. And, again, I know that of the women's group that I work with, 25, I think only one of them, a couple of them had run before, so they were obviously inclined already to run for office. And one of them had grown up knowing that she was going to run for office. Everybody else was only fired up by the election of Donald Trump. But we also think that the election of Donald Trump was symbolic of the fact that women were not being heard, women were not being listened to, and that is it's all very complicated, and maybe we can't always put it into words, but there's a movement that's happening among women in this country, and we are we're standing up, we're being counted, we're asking, and we're demanding that we be heard, and a lot of that is happening through marches and through groups and through a lot of other means, but a lot of it is going to be happening at the ballot box. And it will forever change the complexion of this country's electorate. Especially if we prevail. In 2018.
Well, that is both reassuring and encouraging to hear. Jana Lynne, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Of course, the best of luck. I think I can probably say, without any fear of being called biased, that you are the Holmes Report's preferred candidate for the
well, thank you very much.
for the Texas 6th District. So we're happy to give you our endorsement already. So well done.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Although I am quite sure it will have absolutely zero bearing on your chances, but it sounds zero. But it sounds like you don't need our support. We'll check in with you again, though, for sure. Perhaps after the primary is over, and you're
that would
engaged.
Be great. Yes.
You're engaged in a fight with a Republican opponent, which I guess will be even more fun, but I imagine even more high profile as well. So
yes,
thank you.
I think so.
Yeah. So
thank you very much.
You've been listening to The Echo Chamber. Brought to you by The Holmes Report and produced by Marketeers. Sponsored by March Communications, connecting innovation and people.